The forest was alive with 1,000 quiet sounds: the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the crackle of a dying campfire. Mark, Lisa, and Adam sat huddled together, wrapped in blankets, their laughter dissolving into the crisp, cool air. They were deep in the Appalachians, miles from the nearest town, basking in the isolation. "I dare you to tell a story scarier than the one about the ridge stalker," Adam said, his grin flickering in the firelight. "You don't believe that nonsense, do you?" Mark scoffed, poking the fire with a stick. Lisa shivered. "They say he hunts the lost, following the sound of your voice until, well, you know the rest." She trailed off, her eyes darting to the encroaching darkness. For a while, silence reigned. Then, softly, almost imperceptibly, came a sound. A whistle. It was faint at first, carried by the wind like a wandering tune. 3 notes. High, low, higher. It lingered in the air for a moment before disappearing entirely. "You guys heard that, right?" Lisa asked, clutching her blanket tighter. "It's just the wind," Mark said, though his voice wavered. But then it came again. The same 3 notes. This time louder, closer. Adam's bravado vanished. "Okay, that's not funny. Who's out there?" He stood, flashlight in hand, and shone it into the black void of trees. The beam revealed nothing but the skeletal silhouettes of branches, clawing at the sky. "Maybe it's another camper," Mark suggested, though his expression betrayed his doubt. "There's no one for miles," Lisa whispered. The whistle returned, sharper, more deliberate. It echoed from behind them, then to their left, then from the treetops. A chill settled over the group as they realized it wasn't coming from a single direction. It was surrounding them. "Let's just get in the tent," Lisa urged, her voice trembling. As they scrambled inside, zipping the tent shut, the whistling ceased. For a moment, the only sounds were their shallow breaths and the distant rustle of leaves. And then, the footsteps began. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They were slow, measured, circling the tent. Mark clutched a knife, his knuckles white. Adam held his breath, his eyes wide with fear. "It's just an animal," Mark whispered, though no animal moved with such deliberate intent. The footsteps stopped. Then, without warning, a hand pressed against the tent wall, just inches from Lisa's face. She screamed as the shape of long, thin fingers stretched the fabric. "Who's there?" Adam shouted, his voice cracking. Silence. Suddenly, the tent buckled violently, as if something or someone had thrown itself against it. Lisa shrieked, Mark cursed, and Adam scrambled for the zipper, desperate to escape. They burst into the open air, their flashlights darting wildly through the forest. But there was no one there, only the trees, tall and indifferent, and the remnants of their dying campfire. Then the whistle returned. This time it was deafening, like it was right next to them. 3 notes. High, low, higher. Run, Mark shouted. The 3 sprinted into the woods, branches clawing at their clothes, roots threatening to trip them. The whistling followed, relentless, growing louder with every step. Lisa stumbled and fell, her flashlight skittering across the ground. When she looked up, she saw something that froze her blood. A figure stood in the distance, barely illuminated by her fallen light. It was impossibly tall, its limbs elongated and grotesque, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, as if studying her. And then it whistled. High, low, higher. Get up, Adam screamed, pulling her to her feet. They ran until their lungs burned, until the whistling faded into the distance. Finally, they stopped, collapsing onto the forest floor. We need to find the trail, Mark panted. That thing, what was it? Lisa stammered. Adam didn't answer. He was staring at something behind them. Slowly, Lisa and Mark turned. Carved into the bark of a tree was a single word, welcome, and below it, the ground was littered with items. A torn sneaker, a rusted flashlight, a blood-stained scarf. Lisa choked back a sob. These are from people, Adam finished. Other people who didn't leave. Before they could process the discovery, the whistling returned, louder than ever. It was coming from all around them, from the trees themselves. High, low, higher. The flashlights flickered, then went out. And that's when they saw them. Dozens of figures emerged from the shadows, tall, gaunt, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Each one moved in perfect silence, their faces frozen in eerie, unnatural grins. Mark gripped the knife, but it fell uselessly from his trembling hands. What do you want?" he whispered. The figures parted, revealing a single being at their center. Its face was obscured, its form barely human. It leaned forward, its presence suffocating, and whispered in a voice that scraped against their very souls. "We want you." The whistling began again, now deafening, as the figures closed in. When the sun rose, the campsite was empty. The only thing left behind was a tattered tent and 3 words scratched into the dirt. High, low, higher. The lake was still as glass, mirroring the ink-black sky above. Anna and her younger brother, Sam, stood by the shoreline, admiring their tent pitched in the clearing just a few feet away. It was their first solo camping trip, a daring adventure far from the humdrum of the city. The locals had warned them. The old man at the gas station had leaned in close, his cracked lips trembling as he whispered, "Don't camp by that lake. It doesn't like visitors." But Anna had laughed it off, dismissing it as nothing more than local folklore. Now, as the firelight danced across the water, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that the old man's words carried weight. "Come on, it's just a story," Sam said, throwing another log onto the fire. "You don't actually believe in lake ghosts, do you?" Anna forced a smile, but her eyes betrayed her unease. "No, of course not." By midnight, the woods had grown unnervingly silent. No crickets, no wind rustling the trees, just the oppressive quiet of the wilderness. Anna stirred restlessly in her sleeping bag, staring at the shadows cast on the tent wall by the dying embers of their campfire. Then she heard it, a soft, muffled sob. Anna froze, her breath caught in her throat. She nudged Sam, who groggily opened his eyes. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "What?" Sam asked, annoyed. The sobbing grew louder. It was a woman's cry, soft and broken, drifting from the direction of the lake. Anna unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. There, standing ankle-deep in the water, was a figure. A woman, her long, stringy hair plastered against her face, her shoulders convulsing as she wept. "Hello," Anna called out tentatively. The woman didn't respond. She didn't move. "Maybe she's in trouble," Sam said, grabbing his flashlight. As they stepped closer to the lake, the beam of light caught the woman's face, or rather, the lack of one. Her features were blurred, like smudged paint, her eyes sunk in hollows that reflected nothing. Anna stumbled back, her stomach turning as cold dread washed over her. The woman's head snapped toward them, her hollow eyes locking onto Anna's. And then she smiled. The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural growl that shouldn't have come from anything human. The woman took a step toward them, her feet dragging unnaturally through the water. "Run!" Anna screamed, yanking Sam's arm. They bolted for the tent, grabbing only their keys and phones before sprinting into the woods. The woman's laughter echoed behind them, a sound like nails scraping against metal, growing louder and louder. The siblings ran until their lungs burned, weaving through the trees in a desperate attempt to put distance between them and the lake. Finally, they stopped to catch their breath. We lost her," Sam panted. Anna wasn't so sure. The silence felt heavier now, pressing down on them like a weight. "We need to get back to the car," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. As they turned to retrace their steps, Anna noticed something strange. The trees around them seemed unfamiliar. The path they'd taken was gone, replaced by dense thickets of gnarled branches. How did we get turned around?" Sam asked, panic creeping into his voice. Before Anna could respond, a soft sound reached her ears. Drip, drip, drip. She turned her flashlight toward the noise, and her heart dropped. Water was pooling at their feet, though there was no stream, no source. The growl came again, deeper this time, reverberating through the trees. And then they saw her. The woman stood just a few feet away, her face impossibly distorted, her limbs unnaturally long. She grinned at them, her teeth jagged and dripping black water. "Why are you running?" she whispered, her voice echoing as if it came from everywhere at once. Sam screamed and took off, but Anna stood frozen, her body refusing to obey her mind's desperate commands. The woman's head tilted, her grin widening impossibly, and then she lunged. Anna blinked and found herself back at the campsite. The fire was burning brightly, the tent zipped shut. Sam was beside her, sound asleep. Was it all a dream? Her heart pounded as she unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The lake was calm, the forest alive with the gentle hum of crickets. Relief washed over her. She shook Sam awake. "We need to leave now." "Why?" he asked groggily. But before she could answer, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a single notification. New photo saved to gallery. Her blood ran cold as she opened the app. The photo was of her and Sam, sitting by the campfire. But standing behind them, just barely visible in the shadows, was the woman. Her hollow eyes glared directly at the camera, her grin wide and menacing. Anna dropped the phone, her breath coming in short gasps. "Anna?" Sam asked, his voice trembling. She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "We need to go. Now." But Sam didn't move. He just sat there, staring at her with hollow, empty eyes. And then he smiled. The fire crackled and hissed, sending showers of embers spiraling into the night sky. Her friends, Jake, Clara, Mia, and Tom, sat in a loose circle, the golden flames casting flickering shadows across their tired faces. They had hiked miles into the forest, craving escape, adventure, and a night under the stars. "Let's tell ghost stories," Jake suggested, his grin illuminated by the dancing firelight. "No way," Mia said, hugging her knees. "This place is creepy enough without making it worse." "Oh, come on," Jake teased. "We're in the middle of nowhere. What's the worst that could happen?" Clara smirked. "Fine, I'll start." She leaned forward, her voice low, weaving a tale about a lost traveler who stumbled into a cursed forest and was never seen again. As the story unfolded, the fire seemed to dim, the shadows around them growing longer, darker, more sinister. All right, you win," Tom interrupted nervously, tossing a stick into the flames. "That's enough scary stuff for one night." The group laughed, though unease lingered in the air. Jake reached for another marshmallow to roast, but as he glanced at the fire, his laughter died in his throat. Guys," he said, his voice tight. The others turned to him, then followed his gaze. There, in the heart of the flames, was a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light, it was solid, defined. A human figure standing impossibly still within the fire, its head cocked slightly to one side, as if watching them. "That's not normal," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "It's just the wood burning weird," Clara said, though her tone was unconvincing. "No," Jake insisted, stepping back. "That's not wood. Look, there's no smoke, no ash, nothing." The figure in the fire moved. It tilted its head the other way, its shadowy form rippling like liquid but remaining disturbingly human. Mia screamed and stumbled back, tripping over her bag. "What is that?" "I don't know," Jake said, grabbing a stick and jabbing it into the flames. The moment the stick touched the fire, the shadow vanished. The flames roared back to life, normal once more, as if nothing had happened. For a moment, no one spoke. The forest seemed to lean in closer, the trees whispering secrets they couldn't quite hear. "Let's just go to bed," Clara said finally, her voice shaking. Reluctantly, they agreed, retreating to their tents. But sleep didn't come easily. Hours later, Jake woke with a start. The fire was out, leaving the campsite bathed in an oppressive darkness. He rubbed his eyes, trying to figure out what had roused him. That's when he heard it. A faint crackling sound, like embers reigniting. He unzipped his tent and peered outside. The fire pit was glowing faintly, a dim red light pulsating like a dying heartbeat. "Clara?" he whispered. "Tom? Mia?" No answer. Jake stepped out cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The fire pit flickered weakly, but there was no one around. The other tents stood silent and unmoving. Then he saw it. The shadow. It wasn't in the fire this time. It stood at the edge of the clearing, impossibly tall. Its body stretched unnaturally thin. It had no eyes, no features, just an endless void where a face should have been. "Clara!" Jake yelled, backing away. The shadow didn't move. It didn't need to. Instead, the fire behind Jake roared to life, flames erupting without warning. He turned just in time to see something crawling out of the blaze. It was a hand, a blackened, skeletal hand, clawing at the earth as another figure dragged itself free from the fire. Its body was charred and smoldering, its hollow sockets locked onto Jake. Jake stumbled back, tripping over a log. The creature from the fire crawled toward him, its movements jerky and unnatural, as if it were learning how to use its limbs. "Help me!" Jake screamed, but the tents remained silent. The crawling creature stopped, and for a moment, Jake thought it had given up. But then it raised one finger, pointing past him. Jake turned, his heart pounding in his chest. The shadow was gone. "Jake!" A voice whispered behind him. He spun around to see Clara standing by the fire pit, her face pale and expressionless. "Clara, we have to go. There's something..." She smiled, but it wasn't her smile. It stretched too wide, her lips cracking as blackened teeth peeked through. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the fire's light. "You shouldn't have stayed," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. Jake backed away, but Clara stepped forward, her movements stiff and unnatural. "I told you not to look into the fire," she continued, her tone mocking. What are you talking about?" Jake stammered. "You've been marked," Clara said simply. She raised a hand, pointing to the fire. Jake looked, and his blood turned to ice. In the fire's reflection, he saw himself, not as he was, but as he would be. His skin was charred, his eyes hollow, his mouth twisted into a silent scream. He turned back to Clara, but she was gone. The only thing that remained was the shadow, standing inches away from him, and this time it moved.